Are we live?
Just turned it on.
Oh, we're live.
Yeah.
Brian Wise, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really great to have you here, man.
Great to be here.
What's the number of barrels of oil underneath the soil of Wyoming? Does anyone actually know?
If they do, they have not told me.
Okay.
And I would be skeptical of anyone who claimed to know.
Okay, all right. It's either a national security secret or it's anyone's guess.
Well, I would say there are estimates and educated guesses, but proving it is an entirely different thing.
Right, you have to go get it.
That's right.
I remember when I graduated college, this was 2011. I mean, everyone was saying, "Oh yeah, go west, young man, and then get back to the oil fields." I mean, this is what everyone was being encouraged to do. So I think 2011 was that sort of the end of the fracking boom or just sort of the beginning?
Well, to me, fracking and the boom and bust cycle of the oil field are two separate things.
Okay.
So I can't, I was in drilling a
Mm-hmm.
lot more than production, which is what fracking is a part of.
Okay.
Um, I think as far as the boom and bust cycle, 2011 was just a pretty robust time in the industry. So, with the high paying jobs available and what appears to be a good future for those, that's the time when, people really are a proponent of working in the oil field. During a bust cycle, when everything trends down,
Sure.
you get a little different, uh, you know, feeling from people a lot of the time.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's crazy how I heard 19-year-old guys say, "Oh yeah, I was in high school. I worked a job at McDonald's. Maybe I earned $6,000 that whole year. The next year I was in an oil field and I earned 120.
Mhm.
I and they would say, I literally didn't know what to do with the money I was earning. Oh, that would have been part of the boom cycle.
Right. Yeah.
What causes these booms and busts?
Commodity price.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the value of oil.
Okay.
When the value of oil is high, say it's 110, $120 a barrel.
Hmm.
Um, Everybody wants to drill for it. People are maximizing their extraction just to try to get that money. But when, maybe we get into a 40 or $50 a barrel scenario,
Hmm.
there are people, may even be just minimizing their drilling to hold on to the leases they have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. What got you into the mineral extraction?
Well, it was kind of a couple different things. When I was a child, my dad drilled water wells. So
Okay.
he had his own water well rigs, and I was just around that stuff as a kid. And then as I became able to work, like when I was a teenager, I started working for him on the water well rigs.
Right.
I think I started operating a rig by myself when I was about 16 and then just went from there off and on with that. I did learn to weld in high school, so that I used that a lot on those rigs, and then I went to work for an oil field service company, um, and did that part time while I was in college welding for them. So that was actually the first time I was out in the oil field. But then, I kind of bounced around doing some different jobs, and when I returned to the oil field in about 2004, I was just the low man on the crew on an oil rig. Yeah, Worms Corner, they called it. Nothing.
Worms Corner.
Worms Corner. Right.
There are no nightclubs
No.
at Worms Corner.
No. Yeah, it's kind of a derogatory term, and that's what they used to put on the new guy on the crew. It was just
Mm.
kind of like, FNG is a term that a lot of people might know that are used on a new guy. It's just kind of it's almost like a little hazing thing, I guess,
Yeah.
that goes on with the new guy in you know industry, and especially when there's a bunch of guys involved,
Right.
nicknames,
Right.
and how
Yeah.
that kind of stuff goes.
Yeah, exactly. We got to remind him that if he wants to move up, he's going to have to work for it
That's
and
right.
endure a lot of shit.
That's right.
Wow. Wow. Huh. But you came in with experience, but nonetheless, you still had to be the low man on the totem pole for a while.
Yeah, and I think my earlier rig experience, even though it was a lot smaller rigs and a lot different style of drilling,
Hmm.
it did help me to progress more quickly through the ranks,
Sure.
um, working on oil rigs.
Right. Right. What's the I've what's the factor of intelligence in this field? I mean, is it like if you're a pretty smart kid, you're hardworking, you move up real quick? I mean, are there guys who, for one reason or other, just don't have their brain turned on and just sort of struggle in the oil industry for 30 years, kind of doing the same thing?
I mean, yeah, there's all kinds. It's like you said, there's guys starting out that can work hard, use their tools,
Mm,
progress quickly because they can be an asset for the
mm,
operation.
mm.
Um, there's some guys that, I don't necessarily attribute it to lower intelligence
Okay.
immediately, especially in the oil field, but
Okay.
um, I see that as at least it used to be, and especially even more so before my time there. It's a place where someone very common can progress just through consistent hard work,
Mm. Okay.
because it's not rocket science. There's concepts you have to learn before you fully understand the operation and what's going on. But somebody who will dedicate themselves to that, and um, the other thing that goes hand in hand with it is a lot of the work is not fun. There's a lot of misery that goes along with the work, whether it be maybe working out in 30 below zero cold weather, or a snowstorm, or a rainstorm, or 115-degree heat, or whatever. And those are 12-hour days out there at a
Right.
minimum. So,
Mm.
it's part of the reason it levels the playing field in a way is because there is just a certain amount of adversity that people have to overcome. And someone who can do that then has other opportunities available to them depending on how much more they have left to give to it.
Okay. Interesting. So yeah, that's great. So it's not intelligence is the final factor. It's sort of endurance and willingness to and continue to show up consistently with a good attitude
Right.
that really allows you to put up with the tough environment of the other people you're working with, but then the tough environment of the physical conditions in which you're working.
Right.
Oh man, 115 degrees, 12 hours. Like there's no running back to the air conditioned trailer.
That's Yeah, luckily I was in an office position when I was referenced that experience.
Okay.
And I definitely felt for those guys that were out there working in the heat, but like that industry, it's very dangerous to begin with. So
Hmm.
in the way they handle things now, I think all companies basically have adopted this, but you start every day with a 30-minute safety meeting. So one of the things we would address in our safety meeting is proper hydration and heat related illness.
Oh, really?
It's a
Wow.
a very common occurrence. So you have to have the people trained and have the resources for them right there to be able to keep them going, because otherwise a human just can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I had no idea. What was your toughest day working in working in the oil extraction?
Uh I can't probably tell you a single toughest day. There are certainly days and parts of those experiences that stand out.
Oh.
I remember one time we were on a rig move. So, we basically have this giant drilling rig disassembled into loads that will fit on a semi, and then we move them over to a new pad, and we have to reassemble everything. So, once all the crane work and the winch truck work is done, setting the equipment where it goes, then it's just rigging up by hand. And I can remember it was Christmas Eve one time in the oil field. You work 365 days a year,
Yep.
24 hours a day.
Yep.
Not necessarily one person, but that's the operation schedule. So we were rigging up at night. Uh, didn't have any power to the rig yet, so like our boiler wasn't running. We didn't have any heaters going. We just had some light plants, so we had light to work at night, and it was 25 to 30 below that night, and a 30-mile-an-hour wind, snowing lightly. It was just all night long, all the cold and misery you could take.
That's rough. That's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one time I was new on a crew, um, and I was replacing one of the crew members. So I wasn't liked by the other crew members that, had already worked with this guy that was getting replaced. And I had to wait up the entire mud system, and we didn't have any kind of bar dispenser, Bayrite. I had to do it all by sacks, which are 100-pound sacks, one at a time, lifting them over to the hopper and dumping them in. I think I did like 13 pallets in a day or something like that with no help because the
Wow.
rest of the crew didn't like me yet. Yeah,
That was
so
the initiation.
yeah, that's
Wait,
right.
so what, 100-pound sacks of sand
Yeah, well, it's
or
Bayrite. It's a weighting additive that you add to your fluid.
okay.
The way you have to hold the formation pressure back in a well
Hmm.
is by tuning the weight of your fluid that you're putting in it. That exerts the correct amount of hydrostatic pressure on the formation to keep the oil and gas from spraying out of the ground and having a blowout like uh, the accident in the Gulf about 10 years ago. That was an uncontrolled blowout.
They made a movie about that.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, Deepwater Horizon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think you could, in layman's terms, just sort of give us a quick overview of how you, I think a lot of people think of mineral extraction in a very vague way and oil extraction as, oh, there's a big lake of black water called oil underneath the ground and we go and just go get it, right? I mean, I think that is how some people envision it. Can you give us a more general sense of it?
Yeah, so the way I kind of try to relate this to people usually is, I think the basic image that most people have is kind of almost like a cartoon image where there's like a big bubble of oil, trapped beneath the surface in the earth. And our goal is to drill into that bubble and just, drop a pump in it and pump it all out of there. And the way it really is underground, there are not usually large openings that contain the oil. It's a porous rock. So there's actually like a rock structure, like if you think of volcanic rock that you see on the surface that's porous,
Mm-hmm.
it has all the holes through it like Swiss cheese. The formation down there is actually oftentimes something more like that, or maybe even a sand, where the only spaces are between the grains of sand. So you drill into that and it contains what you're looking for in the form of oil, but it often takes, like fracking as an example, to create bigger fractures in that rock than what's there to allow the pressure of that formation to force what you want to your well bore so that it can be brought to surface.
Okay. All right. So you have to go in and you either have to crack rock or push sand to create sort of this, again, I'm thinking like this vacuum, this empty space underneath the ground into which you can insert something that can pump out the liquid oil, or is it in a different form than liquid?
Well, I mean, there are gas wells,
Okay.
and even some of the gas wells I've been around, they contained a little bit of liquid oil as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like typical oil well drilling, what you're kind of getting into, you went a little further with what you're saying is kind of an example of fracking. Like they they put a pressure on the formation that causes it to break, to fracture the rock, and then they'll actually pump sand into that to keep those fractures open to where the fluid can channel through the sand within the fracture to the well bore. And initially, because of the pressure that's on the formation, like which is what we're talking about when we say you've got to prevent a blowout from happening with
Okay.
your weighted fluid.
Uh-huh.
So the reason that a blowout occurs is because the formation pressure down there at 10,000 feet or wherever you're at is very high. So if, say, you just had an open well bore with just air in it, an atmospheric pressure against that intense formation pressure, it just blows out uncontrolled. And when it ignites, then it's a real mess.
Okay, so I'm envisioning like by by analogy, if I like split apart a piece of wood, right? I'm trying to pry it open, but it wants to come back together.
Mm-hmm.
Is the same kind of thing going on with rock. Like the rock wants to collapse back to its original shape. Is that an accurate image?
I would say that that is a little bit more of a description that I would probably kind of put on fracking,
Okay.
where you're trying to manipulate that rock a little bit more because people have figured out how to do that.
Yep.
Rock mechanics is a study.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a thing.
I'm a rock mechanic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Mostly from what I did, like I said, I was in drilling, not production. So, um, what I was trying to do is just get through the rock and get the channel through the earth into the formation where we could extract the resource. But I feel like in our discussion here, the thing that's a little bit unclear is formation pressure.
Yes.
So let's say between the surface where you and I walk
Mm-hmm.
and 10,000 feet below the earth, there's multiple layers. And let's say those layers are formations. So in that 10,000 foot span, you're probably going to encounter 8 major formations. And your higher up formations are typically lower pressure. Um, so you drill into them, and the earth is not trying to force anything out at you from having an opening into that formation. But when you drill into a pay zone or a hydrocarbon bearing formation, it's typically under a very high pressure. So even if you had your well bore full of, say, fresh water, which weighs about 8.33 pounds per gallon, and is the basis for hydrostatic pressure, that's not going to be enough. It's going to eject all that fluid out, and then it's going to just uncontrolled, like a jet engine, spew out hydrocarbons just from the pressure that's naturally occurring on that formation without us doing anything to it.
Oh, so it's the weight of all that rock above it
Overburden, yeah, that's a big
that
part of
just
it.
you're like, oh, there's a way to push all of this out out to the surface. So it's just all that weight, 10,000 feet of rock and earth.
Right.
And it's like, oh, we created this little fissure and just
Yeah, and then that can be intensified, and I'm not an expert on this. My job was to keep the well from blowing out, not determine, exactly everything that's going on with the formation from a geologic perspective. There are people, who do that, but um, the hydrocarbons in the formation, I think, generate a little bit of force too. So it's not just overburden, and it can come from other things too. Like if you have, say, a lake that has a crack that's communicating with the formation, it may be picking up pressure from something like that. That's not common, but I'm just illustrating the point that I'm not confident that all pressure comes from overburden.
mm-hmm.
There are internal forces within the earth that generate some of that pressure too.
Wow. No, this is great. I've never really understood any of this stuff. Right. I saw the Deepwater Horizon movie and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I guess Mark Wahlberg has to save the day. But I didn't understand some of the mechanics behind it. Okay. So your job was to ensure that as you're like needling this hole into the earth, that you have enough pressure behind your boring device that you don't get just everything water, boring device, and the mineral itself that you're trying to extract just spewing out. Right. And so that's where you're bringing material and you're putting material behind your boring device to hold pressure.
Right. So there's constantly fluid in the hole.
Okay.
What you're doing as you drill is you have a drill string that's basically pipe. It screws together. It's hollow through the middle. So what you do is you screw onto that with whatever rig equipment you're using, whether it be like a Kelly on an older style rig or a top drive. You screw into that pipe with it and you pump fluid down through it. And that fluid goes all the way down through it to the bottom of the well bore inside the pipe. And then it comes out of the drill bit.
Yep.
And then it comes up the annulus, which is the space between your well bore and the outside of that pipe.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so. Yep.
Yeah. So, um, like you're not actually putting fluid behind your tools in the hole. The
Okay.
fluid is actually slightly ahead of them because it's coming out the very end of your drill string,
Okay.
typically.
Okay. All right. So it's like that straw, that pipe goes down into the earth, and then through that pipe, you're putting your sand, is what you typically call it?
No, it's fluid.
Fluid. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then when it gets to the end, it fills up the cavity that's between your straw, your pipe, and and this and the bored hole through which that pipe has been inserted.
That's right. And
And
that
that's called
fluid,
the annulus.
the annulus is, yeah, the space between the inside of the well bore and the outside of the drill pipe.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you're constantly circulating that fluid.
Okay.
Like you don't just drill a little bit and add a little fluid or something like that. The whole time you're drilling ahead, you're pumping because that fluid, in the industry, is typically just referred to as mud or drilling mud.
Right.
And it's a team effort to keep that right. It's one of the major operations of oil location or gas well location.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, you tune the weight because you can't have it too heavy, or otherwise you might break down the formation and then your fluid just begins to leach out into the formation and you lose your returns at surface,
Hmm.
which is a potentially very dangerous situation. So it's a fine line between skating that pressure balance where you're slightly overbalancing the formation pressure, but you're not putting so much pressure on it that you inadvertently fracture that rock and lose your fluid. Because if you do that and you lose your fluid and can't keep that hole full, your hydrostatic pressure's dropped. Once that hydrostatic pressure drops below formation pressure, then the formation pressure begins to make its way to surface.
And that's where you get
That will cause a
blowouts.
blowout. Yeah, and it will just get faster as it begins. At first, it's going to have a certain amount of hydrostatic pressure from the fluid on top of it. But
Hmm.
as that formation is allowed to flow and that amount of fluid gets less, that your tuned drilling fluid that you've pumped in, as
Hmm.
it gets less and your lighter formation fluid coming in gets greater, the formation can accelerate the rate at which it's spitting fluid out of
As
your
it
well.
has less to work its way past.
Right. There's lower your pressure at the top from your drilling mud is coming out, is
Hmm.
getting lower and lower and lower.
Hmm.
So it can just release
Right,
fluid
right. Down
faster.
at the bottom, it's moving at a certain rate of speed, but it's accelerating as it has to push past. Right, because the pressure of your mud down here has all the weight of the mud above it.
Right.
But then near the surface, there's almost no weight behind it.
Well, and as if, say, like I said, you've lost circulation and you can't keep that fluid column up and the formation pressure begins to push it out, you lose part of your hydrostatic pressure because your drilling mud is heavier than most likely what's coming in out of the formation.
Hmm.
That pressure is still the same. So as the column of fluid gets lighter and lighter and lighter from being ejected out by the formation can flow faster and faster and faster.
Hmm. Whoa.
So, there are tools. You have blowout preventers to stop that kind of stuff from happening. You can shut a well in on that kind of stuff. I just bring it up because it illustrates the importance and part of the difficulty of drilling
Hmm.
in maintaining that correct pressure to hold the formation back, but not having too much where you potentially create a disaster.
Uh-huh.
Or at the very least, I mean, maybe you just lose part of your returns. So what that means is some of your fluid's going into the formation and some of it's coming back to surface, and the hands that you have working for you on the rig are going to have to work 4 times as hard that day to try to heal up
Running extra mud.
and maybe mixing LCM, lost circulation material, to try to plug up those holes in the formation to
Uh-huh.
get where you're getting all your fluid back that you're putting in. Because the fluid balance that you maintain when you monitor a well like that is very important.
Mhm.
You cannot receive more fluid back from that well than you put into it. If you do, you're getting hydrocarbon intrusion,
Uh-huh.
and you're on the road to starting a blowout. So that's one of the things that, like, a driller or a rig manager or any kind of drilling advisor will often watch is, you call it gain loss.
Hmm.
You make sure that you're keeping things even. If you transfer mud over from another tank or something, you document that because everything's getting recorded.
Okay. And this is all of this is doing that what you're describing is you're just punching the hole. Is that correct? Like you're not at this part of the process, you're not actually bringing oil to the
That's
surface.
correct. Not
Okay.
Hopefully not. Yeah.
Hopefully not.
Right.
That's that hydrocarbon intrusion that you were talking about, whereas you don't want this stuff coming up yet. You're just punching the hole
Right.
so that someone else can come to the well later and like tap into that and start extracting the mineral that you're seeking. In this case, oil, but maybe it's gas for a different type of operation.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. The So after drilling, you're going to move the rig off, and then you'll bring in like your frac crews
Mm-hmm.
and get the well ready for production.
Okay.
Then once they've finished their well activities,
Mm-hmm.
the fracking and backfilling with sand and testing flows and that kind of stuff, then yeah, they'll put the well online and you'll actually begin producing from it.
Okay, interesting. So then Yeah, so then just going to the production side a little bit. So you've gotten your hole, your well successfully punched. So then production, you're extracting material from the earth. Are those are those well are those active wells putting any material back in to replace what they're taking out?
Typically, no.
Okay.
There
And so
is,
that why does that not cause problems?
well, like I said, it's not just a cavern that
Okay.
contains what you're after down
Uh-huh.
there. If you'll think of like porous lava rock that you
Mm-hmm.
find on surface now,
Mm-hmm.
and you think of that space down there, it's the same rock structure essentially. And granted, there's portions that have been fracked and backfilled with sand, but that's not enough to cause stability issues.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, then you still have essentially the rock to support everything. There are, I've heard of instances where they like have to do grouting from removing things from under the surface of the earth. And this is related to coal bed methane drilling, but essentially, I think it would actually thinking a little more about that. I think it may have been coal extraction where they mined it underground and then drilled in and essentially pumped high pressure concrete to give the earth the same stability that it had before. That's at a much shallower depth though than
Mm.
like a 10,000-foot oil well. You don't, in my experience, I never ran into those stability issues, where you would create from removing something. I do, hear a little bit on the news about areas with increased seismic activity from injection wells,
Mm.
where say you have fluid at surface that you need to dispose of, so you'll drill a well into a formation that has a lower pressure, and typically they're deeper. And then you can put an injection unit on that well and bring trucks in with fluid that you don't want around, and you can inject it back into the earth from that. But that, some people say creates increased seismic activity in some of those areas. Stands to reason that it may.
Some earthquake juice, just pump it in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, just injecting it pretty soon. It's like the earth has roid rage, you know what I mean? It has an injection. The next thing you know, it's wow.
That may be a very good way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. Some roid rage.
Roid rage.
Okay, interesting. So I think this is the big insight that I lacked before is that I think in my head people would describe part of this drilling process, and I thought in the process of the drilling you're also trying to get the oil to come out at the same time, but you're not. You're just trying to get the channel to it so that you can draw the needed material out.
That's
So
correct.
it's a three-phase process. You're punching the hole, then you're setting up the well, and then you're leaving an active well. And then I guess there's a fourth part where if the well runs dry, then you have to shut it down and
Plug and
perhaps fill it
abandon.
in, plug it.
Plug and abandon is
Okay.
the industry term. Yeah.
Okay.
So another part, just to give you a little clarity, like as you're drilling, um, there are different intervals where you will set strings of casing. So as you drill, you have an open well bore where essentially the walls are made of rock. And then when you get to a certain depth, you'll run in steel casing in that well and then cement that casing, where you've essentially created like a mechanical bond with the earth between a casing string, a steel casing string, and the
Yep.
rock.
Okay.
And then part of that process will be to pressure test that to make sure that that string isn't leaking with a certain amount of pressure on it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time you'll drill out the very end of it, which is called the shoe, and you'll pressure test that, where you're pressure testing that mechanical bond of your casing string to the rock down there.
This is just to make sure that the steel casing has adhered to the rock sufficiently.
Right. And that's essentially it, summarized. The purpose for it is like if we get in a situation where we're drilling ahead in open hole past that casing string, and say we drill into an overpressured formation and have to shut the well in with our blowout preventer because we don't have adequate hydrostatic pressure from our drilling fluid to hold back the formation pressure. Um, Sorry, guys, kind of lost my train of thought.
No, you're good. You're good.
Anyhow, so by knowing what pressure that shoe at the end of that casing string can hold,
Yeah.
you'll know what surface pressure you can put, what your limitations are for shutting in that well. And then the next part of this, which is what I was trying to think ahead to just a second ago there, is like fracking.
Yep.
fracking has been, it has been a bad thing in certain areas, and anyone
Hmm.
who says otherwise is not paying attention. But
Hmm.
the thing that most people I think
You're a
don't
publicist
get,
for Halliburton.
could be, the thing that most people don't get is how many times fracking has been executed correctly and there have not been problems.
Hmm.
The reason I reference a little bit about the casing design and the way you test the casing is because to properly execute fracking, you also have to know that those upper zones can withstand the pressure that you're trying to put down on your lower zones where you're trying to fracture the rock, but you want the rock above isolated so it's not experiencing that pressure, because especially in the upper zones, that's where our groundwater is coming from. So I don't, as an oil field employee, I didn't want any contamination in my groundwater. I tried to do my job the best I could to keep that out. And I think most people, in that position do the same thing, but it is a human process with mechanical components. And, sometimes it doesn't all come together correctly. And those are the instances, the rare occasions where that happens, that fracking does create, the various issues that it can, and gets the bad name that many people often recognize about it.
Right, but you could have a 99.5% perfect performance rate, but that 0.5% will produce enough stories that will be dramatic enough to get into newspapers and on websites, and that's why people read,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And, you saying that makes me think of air travel. Like,
Hmm.
we all get on an airplane and feel pretty good, but there are those rare instances where it doesn't work out.
Yeah,
And that's just a reality of life.
right. Well, we had a pilot on what, 2, 3 weeks ago? I think it was 3 weeks ago already. It was the same thing. Like, he flies all the time, but he's also been in the industry for, I think, already 15 years. He had all these stories, you know what I mean? It was like, oh yeah, then in like 68, that was a pretty bad one, when Pan Am, blah, blah, blah. And then in 1979, there was another bad accident. And then in the 80s, Boeing had all sorts of problems with it, blah, blah, blah. And I was sitting there being like, oh man, like maybe I shouldn't as fly as much as I do.
Yeah.
he had a litany of stories to tell. Yeah.
Well, and there are certain people that, they get on a plane and that's all they think about.
Sure.
But
Sure. Absolutely. Huh. I'm curious. So what made you get out of oil and drilling? I mean, was it just you're ready for the next thing, or is it sort of a young man's game, a little bit of both?
Well, so in the course of my career in the oil field from 2004 to 2020, I'd worked my way up to being a drilling consultant, and then I was actually a staff employee for Chevron, just carrying out those same duties. And in 2020, I was working in West Texas, and COVID began to happen.
Hmm.
So, before I guess the big mandates or even some of the countries abroad had started to shut down, allowing Americans in, that kind of stuff. We began to feel it in the oil field. People were worried about it. There was people that wouldn't allow service providers in their office and were passing paperwork back and forth through the door just because of their concern for the germs. And so that was beginning to grow. And we weren't sure in our business unit just exactly how that was going to affect our operations.
Sure.
So that is where I first really start to see things slow down. Then with the election going the way it did, right after that, there was a downturn in the area I was in. In West Texas, I think we had 20 rigs running in the business unit I was in. And I believe after all that happened, they were down to 4 rigs.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was really bad for that. And Chevron being a global company, they're a great company. I don't have anything bad to say about them, but um, they had to restructure the business unit. So
Yeah, if you're losing 80% of your operation in this specific unit you're in.
right, yeah. So it was a huge percentage of people that got laid off versus, um, keeping their jobs. And uh, yeah, I wasn't one of the lucky ones that got to keep my job in
Yeah.
that huge reduction. And I've been investing in real estate basically ever since I could afford to, and
Sure.
already had some of my own stuff going on. So, I had over 15 years of putting in the long hours and being away from home half the time. That's another part of it. Working oil rigs, like a lot of the schedule when you work on shore like this is 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So you essentially live two lives. You're
Mm.
away at work for over 2 weeks because you have travel to get there, work 2 solid weeks, and travel to get back. And that's one kind of life you live where essentially it's all focused to just being productive and trying to get enough rest to keep yourself going. And
Hmm.
then you come home and have your other life, where you have time, and that's great because you've got a lot of time off. And if you're smart with your money from the oil field, you've got resources to do things and stuff like that. So that's what I did, making those investments and moving ahead in life. But it's a difficult life when you've got that flip flop going on. And then with the oil field being 24-hour operations, I think there was 3 years straight where I worked only nights. So every 2 weeks I had to flip flop my schedule. Like I'd be active at night for 2 weeks straight and try to sleep during the day, and then come home and immediately have to just flip that to try to be active during the
The
day and
day.
sleep at night like
Yeah.
a normal person. And that that switching for such a long period, it really wore on me. The way that I would have to watch my sleep evolve from when I would be making a change and getting crap sleep, and then in the middle of either one of those periods be settled in and getting good sleep, and then about the time you get there you change back again. So
Hmm.
those kind of things, it makes um, being where you can be home or near home and doing other kinds of work very appealing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that, I will never go back to the oil field, but just with the downturn that occurred and where I was and what I've done since then, like I don't need to right now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
It's tough, like in your life to have that constant switch and change and can't really stay in a rhythm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Very tough. And a lot of, I didn't have a family, but there's a lot of family problems from the guys out there being away from home that much, that
And
make,
out of touch, right? Because
right.
it's not like, right, you're working 12-hour days on a very difficult job. It's not like someone can call you and be like, "Hey, talk to your son. He's acting out at school." It's like
Exactly.
you're gone.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, after your shift, you'll have an opportunity to talk to your family, but it's a safety concern. You can't even have a cell phone out on one of those rigs.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, you're just, yeah, you're just, you might as well be on the moon. I mean, for all the communication you might have with your normal life or your other life.
Yeah. A lot of guys, they're 6 hours or more, 12, 18 hours maybe from home.
Hmm.
They're just, yeah, you're away. You're in a different world. And, maybe you can call your kid after work and tell him happy birthday or whatever, but you're just not the same. And that puts stress on both sides of that.
Yeah. Was it a little bit of a problem on the other side when now you're home for 2 weeks? You don't actually have anything to do, particularly. Um, I mean, were you finding like were you trying to get in touch with friends, trying to get in touch with relatives, and be like, hey, like let's do stuff, and they're like, we're going to work all day. Like maybe we can see you on the weekend, but I mean, were you at all like rattling around a little bit between 9 and 5?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had times, where like I would be home and my girlfriend would be at work, and yeah, I would wish I had her to hang out with or whatever. But
Mm.
a lot of that, I just worked on my time at home
Mm.
too. Or another really great side effect of that was because I like to hunt and fish. I go out during the week when everybody else is at work. Those are great
Yeah.
opportunities.
Hmm. Yeah.
Get the perfect fishing hole and no one's there.
Right. Yeah, you're the only one there because everybody else is at work.
Right. It's 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. Yeah. After Labor Day, there's no one competing for those trout.
Yes, I love that aspect of it.
Hmm. Um, okay, so yeah, so this is interesting. This is a good transition because I mean, so you came home to the ranch. And now you have your own ranch. And what's your ranch operation currently? Is it mostly alfalfa, hay, cattle?
Yeah, so I've got one field that's alfalfa, a smaller field, and that one's actually just outside of Riverton. And then most of my acreage is up in Crowheart. And
Mm.
I've got a little bit of grass alfalfa mix that I irrigate and put up hay off of there. Most of what I have there is straight grass, like mostly brome, a little bit of garrison. Um, and then I have a few horses of my own. I'm actually currently kind of raising a few right now.
Hmm.
And then what I've been doing through the winter time is dude horses that are, or dude ranches is what I should say first, that are not in operation
Yep.
in the winter time. I've been taking in their horses and caring for them through the winter, boarding them. So the hay that I have been putting up in the summer, I then feed, to my own horses that I'm training, raising, and then, largest percentage of it going to those board horses through the winter. This year, I'm in a decline on that. So having to look at potentially some other ways of putting up my hay to make it more valuable in the way I market it.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm searching around a little bit. Not certain how that's going to go.
So are there fewer ranches looking to board horses? Is that what you mean? Or the price of hay is dropping?
Yeah, my issue, specifically, my biggest client, they sold their ranch. Yeah, so
Damn it.
well, it's unfortunate. It was a beautiful property in Jackson Hole that I believe sold for over $50 million. So you can
Wow.
certainly see why it was sold.
They were motivated.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
But it seems, and I probably should do better research, and I'm not going to try to claim any strong statistics here, but it seems like the dude ranch thing is kind of trending down a little bit, and maybe that's just what I'm seeing. Um, it's very possible that as things trend up and down, that could be the case, or maybe it's just one of those things that as we lose older parts of our culture, that might be one that goes away. The Western lifestyle in my lifetime, it seems like, has for the most part gotten a little smaller. It's just something that as people, the majority of people in society become separated from ag, it's not as big of a thing. So it tends to diminish. What was it? I think you guys may know this statistic, but I think like 75 years ago, like one of every three people in America had a close family member directly working in ag. And now it's like, 1 in 20 or something like that.
Hmm.
It's a very different statistic. You can't quote me on those numbers, but
Sure.
just to illustrate the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was like 80%, like in 1920 were farmers of the nation's population. And now I think it's only 3%.
Yeah, exactly. I know the statistics, I don't know exactly what they are, but exactly as you illustrate it. Yeah, it's diminishing. So the appreciation for parts of that culture tend to diminish with the amount of people directly involved in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah.
There is kind of a surge coming now with a lot of young families wanting to do like their own gardens and raising livestock.
Sure.
But I think it's so
But
hard.
that's not the element of the population that has money to go dude ranch for 3 weeks in
Yeah.
July.
Well, and it's a little bit of a different thing. It's a homesteader type
Yeah.
mentality that we're kind of evolving towards, which is it has the similar components of ag, but it's just on a much smaller scale where some of the ranch or farm culture that is kind of what a dude ranch is trying to showcase to people a little bit.
Hmm.
Just
Yeah.
isn't there so much.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. When I was in college here in Lander, man, there was at least one guy who always rode his horse into town. I want, I want to say there were a few others. Certainly for some events, there were some ranchers who came into town on horseback.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if any of them are doing that now. If they're still around, they're too old, and probably just some of them are just gone. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But certainly when I was in college, when I first got here, and this would have been like '07, man, when you walked into Lander Bar, you were like, "Wow, that's the cowboy section, right?" Right. And it was spurs, the jeans, the buckles, the hats. When I walk into Lander Bar now, I don't feel like that element's there anymore.
Definitely a changing world.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not at Lander Bar as much as I used to.
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. One thing I will say, there has been a little uptick in recent years that seems to be related to Yellowstone, the TV show.
Oh yeah.
It's that pop culture has brought a little bit of the popularity back. It just gets that culture in front of people in a different way. And some of the things I've heard is like felt cowboy hat sales.
Oh, interesting.
I think beaver prices, the beaver pelt prices, furs, I think has actually come up because of the demand from,
People watching
people
Yellowstone.
wanting cowboy hats, and
That's
it seems to be
hilarious.
directly related to Yellowstone.
No way.
Yeah.
Dang. Have you
But,
seen that show?
yeah.
Is it any good?
Well, depends on your definition of good, but I'm gonna go ahead and say no. I mean,
All
it's
right.
entertaining. There's
Okay.
some crazy drama. The thing I said when I first became familiar with it is I've never worked on a ranch where 3 nights a week we just ran into town and killed some people. That seems to be what they do.
Right. Man, we're really busy working hard, but man, we make time for the important things, which is running into town and killing some people. Right. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I remember a friend of mine, he's like, yeah, murder, murder, mystery, detective shows, they're all great. But he's like, you know that if most murder mystery shows existed in real life, any of those shows would then those towns, those cities would be the murder capitals of the world. You know what I mean? Every week there's another murder. My friend was saying, like, that would be insane. No one would live in that town after about 6 months, right? They'd all be dead. They'd all have been murdered.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty funny because you're like, oh yeah, if you think about it that way. But I heard like Yellowstone, like beautiful setting and everything, but like also they're like calving in like the middle of July, or they're like, fishing in like late December when there should be like 2 feet of snow on the ground already, just like kind of out of touch with just like the rhythm of a real ranch.
Yeah, there is definitely that. Like you see things that are just, I hear people use different words to describe it, but people familiar with, horses, cattle, ranching,
Yeah.
everybody's got their biggest pet peeve on the way they're trying to portray something. And, when you've seen something along those lines in real life, it's just obviously
Mm,
fake. But it's the same with, I think, with any, if you show a NASCAR movie to a NASCAR driver, he's going to see the same thing.
mm.
It's just the way it is.
That's fair. If there's any sort of martial arts in most movies, I'm usually
There you go.
rolling my eyes, being like, "Oh my God, that would never happen."
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't have the stamina, you don't have the opening, like just it wouldn't happen. It's obviously choreographed.
Yeah.
So interesting. So how much are you riding these days? Are you spending much time in the saddle?
Yeah. I've got some young horses within the last year. I think I've acquired 8 colts that were wild, hadn't even been halter broke or really handled. I've got all those where you can ride them now. So
Wow.
periodically working on them.
Damn. Oh. What do you buy into the natural horsemanship, Monty Roberts school of training?
I'm not familiar with Monty Roberts.
Okay.
I've been fortunate in my life to work with some people probably along the lines of what you're thinking.
Okay.
You know, the stuff I've been taught, I think, uh, as far as I know, the point of origin was with a man named Tom Dorrance,
Okay.
and he passed what he knew and was doing along to a man named Ray Hunt,
Hmm.
and a lot of the
That
people
name I have heard.
yeah, a lot of the clinicians, and horsemen that are out there today, are using techniques based off of what came from Ray Hunt, and
Ray
that's
Hunt.
that's a lot of what I do. There's a guy named Bill Smith over in Thermopolis.
Mhm.
Has had a very successful horse sale for many years. I think he's retired from that, and he put on a lot of colt starting clinics. Like the if you watch too many westerns, people say breaking horses.
Yep.
I really don't break any horses. I try to start colts
Hmm.
where I teach them and prepare them one step to the next, not where I try to force them into something and
Yep.
prove that I'm agile enough to get by it or whatever.
Sure.
The reality of working with those young horses and enough things goes wrong on its own. So I just try to make everything go as smooth as possible.
Uh-huh.
Um, for the horse's benefit, but to preserve my own health
Right.
as well. Yeah. And then that's kind of the basis of like the Ray Hunt method is using just pressure and release and not being heavy handed and progressing your horse through a learning process where they're prepared to before entering into each step as opposed to just roping them and choking them down, putting a saddle on them and crawl on them or something like that, that maybe you've seen in the old Western.
Yeah. There's
Something like
a, I don't know if you've ever read All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy, but there's a really interesting, I mean, he goes down into the gritty detail of how these two old Texas cowboys break some horse, and they do say break
that.
some horses down in Mexico.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'd be curious to compare what was described there with the methods you're using. But um, someone once said to me that like there's a sort of logic that humans and dogs, canines should get along because we're both prey seeking animals. We're both predators.
Hmm.
Someone said to me that the biggest jump in logic that a human has to make is realizing that a horse is itself a prey animal, right? Can you comment on that directly? Does that seem to have a bearing on the way you think about it, or is it sort of just more theory than anything else?
No, I would love to comment on that. I mean, it excites me that you said it that way.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that Bill taught me and a lot of the guys that he was mentoring
Mm-hmm.
back when I was fortunate enough to be around him was, just like you said, that a horse is a prey animal. You have to think of them like a deer, or
Okay.
maybe some wild animal, and think of them that way, and realize that they're just trying to survive. Like maybe they're not doing what you feel is desirable, but they're not trying to do anything wrong. They're just
Mm.
trying to preserve their own life. So
Okay.
as soon as you can wrap your head around that and figure out that really what the problem is you situation, and that you need to figure out how to facilitate things to work for that animal.
Yep.
Based on your understanding that it's just trying to survive and not trying to do something wrong.
Mm.
That's when you begin to progress much faster.
That's what a lot of the clinicians are up against, right? People come in with their problem horses, but we're thinking about our horses as like problem children, like, oh, this horse is stubborn, or oh, this horse is foot shy or head shy, right? It's like this horse has a problem, but in a way, we're sort of anthropomorphizing our horses. We're thinking of them as more as people than actually bears up to the real logic of the situation. And so we think of our horses as having human-like traits like stubbornness and anger in a way that may not be helpful.
I think that's accurate. Like you can't take away that a horse may be stubborn or a horse will get angry.
Mm-hmm.
Those things occur for certain. Um, Yeah, sorry guys, I forgot what I was going to say. That was a really great.
Well, I'm just wondering, okay, a horse could be stubborn, a horse could be angry, a horse could be shy, any of these things, but not in the same way that
Yeah,
humans
so
are.
thank you for that. That
Yeah.
triggers what I was thinking again, like the problem thing that you're bringing up.
Mm-hmm.
If a horse, there are definitely problem horses, but
Mm.
chances are that horse didn't have any issue like that before his training. The problem that he has is likely because of an issue in training.
Mhm.
And a horse is a big, strong animal. Like you're not, nobody's going to go there and do every single thing right with a horse. And sometimes, they may outpower someone or they may scare someone.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the way a horse learns is from pressure and release.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something we use for training. Like if you apply a certain pressure to a horse, the reason you're doing it is to get a response. Okay, like say neck reining. I push my rein against the left side of this horse's neck to get it turned to the right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as soon as you push your rein and that horse goes to move to the right, you need to release that pressure
Mm-hmm.
because the horse has done what you asked.
Yep.
But there may be certain things like maybe you have a young horse that you're just halter breaking, and the first time you go to tie him up, something spooks him and he pulls back, which is the opposite of what you want to happen in that situation. And maybe it catches you off guard and you didn't have him securely tied yet and he gets away. Well, that horse just learned something right there. Like, okay, I was uncomfortable in this situation. I threw a fit and moved backwards as fast as I could to get away from it, and I got out of there.
And it worked.
Click. Yep.
Yeah.
That's so you've just put the basis for a problem in your horse inadvertently.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the next time he does it and he's anticipating that and he gets away even quicker. Well, He's just learned more,
Mm,
so it happens to me too. Like there are times when a horse learns something that you don't want it to learn. So you really have to be paying attention for those situations that have a high potential
mm,
or a negative learning situation with your horse and really try to manage them. But also, if something does go wrong, you've got to figure out a way to work around that and keep your horse doing what you want and not
mm.
doing the wrong thing. Because, sometimes, okay, maybe you're just going to get so focused on that one thing and it just continues to happen. You might have to just step back and say, okay, that didn't go the way I wanted. We're going to try this a little different way, and then maybe come back to that. Keep moving things around and changing to where your horse isn't just locked in, thinking he's stuck in that one uncomfortable position.
Yeah,
And that's just a general statement about training.
right.
Yeah.
I remember one time someone wanted to sell me a horse, and they were pretty young. The horse was young and energetic and seemed to be pretty hardworking, so it seemed to have some real traits going for it.
Mm-hmm.
But man, every time you have the halter on it, you bring it over to the fence and and honestly, most of the time tying it up at the fence or at the rack, not a problem. But I don't know what sparked it off when this horse was young, but it would randomly, again, to me, it seemed random. I mean, would just put all of its weight and strength, just trying to back off that halter rope, and
Mm-hmm.
if it was a weak fence post, I mean, it would, pull fence posts off. It was risking breaking halters. I mean, it was rearing up on its hind legs. And so it was like, this horse is like not safe to saddle up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think it was like 8 years old, something like that. So it wasn't a 2 year old. It was,
Right.
I kind of got the impression it was sort of set in its ways at that point. I ended up being like, this is too much of a problem for me, in my ability level. I don't think I could unwind whatever created this reaction
Sure.
in it. But it was so remarkable how it it was pretty consistent. Whereas under saddle, under reins, it was actually a pretty well behaved animal.
Mm-hmm.
But you couldn't trust it around kids or your friends, or frankly, even yourself.
Yeah.
You just never knew when it was going to try to tear a fence down.
Yep.
So I don't know what happened to it, actually. I think they sold it down the river. I don't know if it ended up in a glue factory.
Yeah, and case in point, who knows what happened in that horse's training where it got a
Mm.
little bit sour on that aspect.
Yep.
And it went far enough, obviously, that horse was just very troubled and very, very bad about it.
Right, right. And I guess what happens is probably the problem compounds because then it gets just passed on to whoever is sort of
Can.
relatively unaware of the issue. And so no one has the person just is totally unaware of the background, and they're the third or fourth person maybe to try to deal with it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and maybe that horse will, cross paths with someone who can figure out, take the time to work something like that out.
mm,
But it's just like, you know, there's less people all the time because we have less dependence on horses that have
Mhm.
the ability to do that.
mm,
Back in the 1850s, like compared to now, hell, everybody was probably a horse trainer just because that was how they had to get around.
Yeah.
right,
So
right.
people's horse skills were way better then, in most of society than they are now, just
Yeah.
because people don't have the use for them. So
Sure. Have you ever seen that? I've ever seen that meme of it was like 1910, and there's these two draft horses pulling an early car out of the mud, right? And then it was 2010, and it's a truck going down the highway with two horses and a trailer, and it says, "Well played, horses.
I have seen.
Well played."
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Like you guys figured it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we're doing it for you.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so you're raising some colts. And so then these are horses that you'll then sell eventually, or just give back to our existing owner, and you'll just charge them for the training you've done.
Well, so colts is kind of a big term, like
Okay.
from basically newborn to 4 years old.
Mhm.
Most people consider that horse a colt. And if you're going to be completely correct about it, horse colt or colt is generally a male
Mhm.
young horse, and then a filly will be a female young horse. But typically, in just general discussion with people just say colt for a young horse. So
Mm-hmm.
I've got three that were born this year. One of them was planned. Two of them came about because I bought 4 2-year-old colts last year, and then two of them that were not showing at the time ended up being bred. So I ended up with two extra colts this spring, two extra foals,
Yeah.
and they're all doing well. So, you
Mm.
know, not that's cool. And then I've got, a few, uh, well, one 2-year-old and some 3-year-olds that are in different phases of training.
Yeah.
So they're mostly what I ride, the 3 and 4-year-olds right now.
Okay.
Or what's getting most of my effort for training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How typically a horse can take 45 minutes of concentrated work a day, or is that a little less, a little more? Depends on the horse. How much teaching can you really do?
Yeah, so the way I feel about it is I never want to really usually get on a horse and just start teaching them something right away
Hmm.
because typically, and it's even more so with a young horse, like they're really full of energy and they're nervous and they're not in a frame of mind to really learn, at least not learn with ease. So I'll take them and maybe lope circles on them or maybe just go ride them out in the pasture for a half hour or something. Get them where maybe they're starting to build a little bit of a sweat and they're starting to slow down. They're not so antsy and nervous.
Mm.
And when I start to get them into that frame of mind, that's when I'll maybe work on their turning or stopping or try to get them to lope a more correct circle, that kind of stuff, just
Mm.
because it's more productive once that edge has kind of been taken off of them. So that varies horse to horse very much.
Sure.
Some are just more laid back, and it's actually really nice when you do get a laid back one that you can just kind of go work with and they're willing. I have
Mhm.
one like that right now that I'm really enjoying. And
Right.
some of them, they're like, I've got one right now that when you get on her, you just have to watch her because she's a little nervous about it. The very first time I got on her, she had a very bad experience, and consequently, so did I. But uh, we've worked her through that,
Got some
and
frequent flyer miles.
that's
Yeah.
right. I did end up getting some of those. Yeah. We've worked through that, and I'm aware of that with her now, and so I just have to be careful because I don't want to take any more of those steps back. We had the one instance where we took a step back, and then we put the effort in. I got a little bit of help and had my cousin snub for me, and got her by it, and it's one of those things.
Mm.
Now until she gets over that little bit of nervousness with that,
Mhm.
have to keep. Sometimes it might take me 5 minutes to get on her just
Right.
because she's nervous about it, and we've got to work up to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Do you feel like there are people who are naturally just better with teaching horses, being around young horses? I mean, do you feel like there's a certain talent involved? Like, yeah, this person just kind of knows how to be around this type of animal.
I think there's some of that comes in. Like if you're more calm, even though you're around something that, is 10 times your size,
Mm.
that definitely helps because part of the prey animal thing is that, they're very tuned in to their surroundings and what's going on around them. So if you're nervous or if you're upset, they're going to pick up on that.
Mm.
But if you're, calm and able to be slow and methodical and just work through things, they pick up on that too, and they'll definitely
Mm.
calm down quicker. They can sense when you're angry or anything for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember being at a clinic and we were working, things were going pretty well. And so like we stopped to take a break. The clinician was talking to all of us, and like my horse just sort of like spreads its feet a little wider and starts peeing.
Yeah.
And I was like, ah. And no, the guy looked over. He's like, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
He's like,
Great.
that's a good sign. That's a relaxed horse. I was like, oh, I didn't know that was the sign of a relaxed horse.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if your horse starts pooping, same
Hmm.
thing. If when I get on one of my colts and I can feel they're tense and we walk off a little bit and then
Hmm.
I can feel them relax and poop and we walk off, it's like you're riding a different horse.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just something about their physiology, that once they've gotten calm enough for that to occur,
Mm.
they're also, in a calm state of mind where
Sure.
they're better to get along with.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I remember I read Alois Podolsky's book, My Teachers, My Horses. And I guess his big thing was when he, so he was the trainer at the Lippes Honor School
Mhm.
out in Austria. I think back in, I want to say like the 50s and 60s. No, 30s and 40s, because he actually went through World War II with them. Anyway, I guess his big thing was when things went well. Of course, this was focused on riding because the Lipizzaner performances are so riding focused. But he would say if things went well, he would hop off his horse, loosen loosen the saddle, and walk him home.
Yep.
And he said that he felt was a great way to tell them that's it. That's the thing I wanted you to do.
Totally agree
Yeah.
with that.
And he
Yep.
wore out some boot leather. All his friends are like, why are you walking home 3 miles? He's like, because it went well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The other day, I've got a horse that's a little bit older that I'm starting to trail cattle on, getting him ready to be a rope horse. And, we've trailed some around and things were a little wild. And then things kind of fell together. He tracked up on this steer, ran him down the arena the way I wanted him to. So I stopped him right there because I had him out and warmed him up, and then we made some rounds in the arena with the steer and stopped him right there. Did just what you're saying, got off, loosened my cinch. I was right next to the corral, so I didn't have to walk home.
sure.
I don't know that I'm probably quite good enough to
Three,
treat my horses
yeah,
that well.
3 miles, 3 miles hike.
But yeah, I definitely same concept. That horse did the right thing right there. It was amazing to me in that setting. The way all I had to do is push him towards that steer the first time, and he did the rest himself. He
Nice.
increased his speed to get close to the steer, tracked the steer without me having to steer him. The only thing I did is stop him because of and it wasn't a lot. It was 6 or 8 strides that everything came together just right. And I stopped it all right there because that's what I want that horse to know. Like when I do this, life gets easier. That's the basis of a lot of horse training. Make the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard because your horse is going to take the path of least resistance
most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we take a quick break? And with it, myself, right? Within a decade, it was statutory rape and or full rape, or it was
right,
or obviously the Bill and the Bill Clinton and the Lewinsky thing. It was the details.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wasn't like, oh, he's having an affair.
Oh yeah.
Imagine the rest of it. It was like Ken Starr was up there and being like, on July 25th, he and blah 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 got together in the blah 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 room and they blah 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 really for a while.
It was details. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. It was ugly. It was really ugly.
So. I'm just getting worse. I mean, look at what the media says about presidential candidates of today. I mean, or a president who's in office even.
Yeah.
Like, the media hated Trump when he was in office and it was just like you could tell they're just passively aggressively picking at him every time you hear about him on the news.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so an exercise in pain for me is I'll get on YouTube and I'll try to listen to something from CNN and something from Fox on the same issue.
I love that.
And it's just like whiplash,
These people are both liars.
You're like, clearly they're from different planets.
Yeah.
Right? We're getting windows into the multiverse. These people exist in this version of the universe. These people exist in a different one. It's insane.
Yeah.
It's 2 different planets.
Well, yeah. It reminds me of like a recent clip I saw of Harris. She was asked in an interview what some of her plans would be to basically increase financial freedom of the average American. Try to improve. What are you going to do financially to improve our quality of life a little bit? And she goes into this speech about how she grew up in a middle class neighborhood and there were construction workers and nurses and people had nice lawns.
All right.
That's what she had to say.
Yeah.
That summed up. I mean,
yeah.
It's like, yeah, I could see the way you're drawing people in to connect with you emotionally. I could see that the whole time. And evidently a lot of them are doing it because she just completely danced around the question. but did it in a way, expressing herself where I'm sure the people in favor of her were just drawn in. Oh, isn't she wonderful?
Right.
God, I'm glad that evil Donald Trump isn't the only choice.
Right. Yeah.
And Donald Trump, I don't love him as a person at all, but my two choices there, I'm having a hard time with Harris on this one.
Well, she looks so creepy. Like her laugh, the way she can hold
Yeah.
herself, the way she talks. She's just like,
Her
ugh.
history. I mean, she was Montel Williams, one of his girlfriends
Oh,
for a
really?
while, according to photos I see.
Well, and the
Tom,
mom.
I'm gonna be honest. I love women with darker skin.
Oh no, no.
Wait, are we
We're
live?
talking- we are. Was getting good. I had to turn it back on. But, well,
Oh, shout out to Kamala.
BTS to talk about this.
I don't know, you say she looks creepy. I don't know that she does.
And I won't hold it against you. Or I get it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, no, it's
Jonathan, there's much better pics in the darkest.
oh man. Man, who's listening to this?
I don't
I gotta
know.
be careful who I share this episode with.
I just want to throw out there that she's not the only woman with a darker complexion.
Yes.
Use your options, buddy.
All right, we'll just say she's too old for me.
There we go.
Oh my gosh. Wow. No, that's great. All right, I got more questions about this rodeo life of yours. So we were sitting around lunch one day, Brian, and you just sort of just dropped it like, "Oh yeah, the feeling you have after successfully getting an 8-second ride on a bull is like nothing else." And I was just like, "Whoa, wait a minute. You rode rodeo?" You said it so nonchalantly. Did you grow up doing it?
I mean, kind of. Like I can remember getting on calves at a branding when I was a little kid, like 8, 9 years old.
Mm.
I didn't have the opportunity to like compete in kids rodeos, like WJRA, stuff like that. I kind of had to get my own job and my own means before I could kind of pursue a career. So about the time I was 15, I really got a lot more serious.
Okay.
Started riding bulls when I could make some money to pay entry fees for high school rodeos and stuff like that.
Okay. What's the basic technique? I mean, I go to a couple of rodeos each year. I'm always like, obviously they're blowing their back out and they won't be able to walk by the end of this. And yet they're getting up and, people are career riders. Obviously there's some injury that happens. So how are you not getting your back broken even during a successful ride?
Well, it's kind of the same, like back to the horses. It's something, 10 or 15 times as big as you.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to outpower them. You're not going to, be stronger than them.
Mm-hmm.
It's about your mechanics in relation to what they're doing and your timing with your mechanics, where you're trying to keep yourself in rhythm with them. So that immense amount of power that they're generating isn't being put directly on your body. When you get out of position, that's when you feel the amount of power that they really have. But when you're doing things right, repositioning yourself slightly each jump during key times and you have that timing correct, it's really pretty smooth. Yeah, and that's what's great about it. When things go like that, there is nothing better. When like I had difficult bulls. I remember one time I had a bull that hadn't been ridden before, and I had him at a pro rodeo. So I got him rode that day and got a high score, and one of the best feelings I ever had in my life. The difficulty about rodeo in general, in a way, but especially riding bulls or riding rough stock, is that things don't always go right. There's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong. So it's kind of, again, one of those things where you have to persevere and you have to keep a good attitude even when things are going incredibly wrong, and do that day after day. That's why it's not for everybody, because it's like one of my friends said when he was injured. We were at Cheyenne one time, and he didn't know what was going to happen to him for the rest of the season. He didn't think he'd even be able to get on the next day, and it was pretty dismal for him. That's exactly what he said. And he just shook his head, hung it low, and said, This is chasing the dream and living the nightmare.
Oh, oh man.
And that's how it
That's
is
the title of the
sometimes.
podcast right there. Wow. So how long did you do it for?
Uh,
So you started
12
around
years.
15.
Yeah.
Okay.
Started writing full-size bulls when I was 15.
Okay. Okay. And finished up in your late 20s
Yeah,
for the most part.
that's right.
Gotcha. What's the training regimen? Is it a lot of strength training? Is it weightlifting? Is it a lot of like just like flexibility and agility exercise?
Yeah.
How do you prep for the athletics?
Well, like you said, agility is a big part. Flexibility is a very big part. You don't train like when you're in the weight room or exercising, whatever your personal regimen may be. You don't train for size. It's just like you said, to be more able.
Okay.
You don't want to limit your range of motion with giant muscles or something like that, because that's not going to benefit you. But flexibility is also a big part of it.
Okay.
That it helps limit injuries.
Yeah.
And when your body can take some of those stresses and situations.
When
that
your
you can't
heel can
really-
touch your ear and it's all okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. Huh. All right. Interesting. Do most you said rough stock, so that's horses, and then bulls are referred to as just bulls, or are they referred to collectively as rough stock?
Yeah. So to break rodeo down, you have rough stock events, which are bull riding, bareback riding, and saddle bronc riding. And then
Okay.
you have timed events,
Mm-hmm.
like steer wrestling, calf roping, team roping, sorry, barrel racing. Um, and yeah, so the rough stock is just where it's an event where you get a score, and your placing, for the prize money is based on what your score is versus like a timed event where the person with the lowest score or the lowest time.
Okay.
Because they did it the quickest.
Right. There's no judge in those timed events, whereas there's judges in these other
There is a
events.
judge, but he has a different job. He's
Okay.
not picking the winner.
Mm.
But like, yeah, you'll have a judge watching, say, a calf roping run, and he'll have a flag, and when it's time for the timer to stop the time, he'll drop the flag.
Okay.
So you do have a judge involved, but at a different capacity.
Different function.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's not scoring, just keeping official time.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. So in the 12 years you did it, was it something you mostly pursued in the summer? It's not a year-round thing, as I understand, or
Yeah.
can it be?
Well, it can, and I figured out a way to kind of work into that. When I was in high school, it was just local stuff, and the indoor arena here in Lander is actually, I think, maybe the first place I was able to practice. So that helped out a little bit in the winter. But then, like after I got out of college, it really took me until the end of high school, start of college to where I got more competitive and was starting to win. So, after I finished up with college, then I would go down to East Texas in the wintertime, spend some time down there where there's still rodeos to go to every weekend. The weather's warmer, and just try to keep myself in the groove and have those opportunities to continue competing instead of going dormant through the winter.
Right. Right. Or then you'd have to spend a month just sort of getting back into that groove, like you say. Interesting. Okay, so you're on the back of the bull. They open the gate. Bull starts hopping around. Now you're going to get judged on the performance of the bull as well as your own performance, right? I mean, those judges are watching to see how badly that bull is trying to get you off.
Right. Yeah. So the way it breaks down, there's two judges, and each judge can give you a total of 50 points. So of his 50 points, 25 points is for the stock, 1 to 25, 1 being the lowest, 25 being the highest. And then there's a rider score, same thing, 1 to 25. So the first judge, he judges you, say your score, say it was a 20-point bull, and you put on a 20-point ride. So that judge has 40 points for you.
Yep.
So then you've got the other judge on the other side of the chute. Let's say he thought it was a 21-point bull and a 21-point ride. So he's got 42 points over there. So then they both show their boards to the announcer stand, or however exactly they're transmitting it. And those two scores are added together for the total score.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So a perfect ride would be 100.
Exactly. Yeah. Can't get over 100.
Right. That's one of the judges is on the take. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
There's going to be questions.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Now, so are these bulls, are they trained in some way or not, or they're bred just to be
Way more breeding. Yeah.
okay.
Genetics than
Uh,
training.
uh-huh. And they're breeding for aggression, athleticism, all of the above.
All the above.
Mm,
Yep.
okay.
And then, they may do some training. Like I see guys buck their young bulls with a dummy where say that it kind of like we were talking about the horses, that bull jumps out and say he turns back a couple times, bucks really hard. They may hit the switch on that dummy and throw that dummy off just
Mm,
so that bull gets in his head. Okay, I did this. That thing left my back. I'm going to do that again.
mm,
You know,
right. Okay. Yeah, because some of these bulls kind of have the ability to turn their back hips sort of over their shoulders in kind of a transverse motion. Is that right? And that's one of the toughest things to ride through.
yeah, like a belly roll, or
Uh,
some people call it sun fishing.
sun fishing.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, and am I describing it correctly?
Yeah, I mean, as far as one difficult thing that a bull can do, yeah,
Mhm.
that's one of the more difficult things to get by.
Yeah.
It's really hard from your balance perspective, but it's also really uneven in your timing.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to have generally a nice rhythmic bucker that's throwing those wild twists at you like that. So chances are most of the other stuff he's doing is a little bit wild too, along with that thrown in there. It's not one of the things that's going to get you a really high score. So you might put out as much effort as you've ever put out and got one like that ridden, and you may not get as high of a score compared to maybe a nice rhythmic spinner that was really electric and probably a lot more fun to ride
Oh,
and win
interesting.
more money. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So a guy could have a technically easier ride, score better, place higher,
Right.
bring home,
Yeah.
bring home the.
Yeah. The luck of the draw, you never want to get too hung up on it because it's a good way to get yourself a bad attitude. But the luck of the draw does play in a little bit,
Mhm.
stuff like that.
Mhm.
And it's just part of the business. Sometimes
Sure.
you're going to have the pick of the pen and sometimes you're not.
I guess some guys probably get on knowing, no way. I just know, all right, we know this bull. No way I'm placing in the top five.
Well, I think the best guys get on those kind and have it in their mind that they're going to do something good.
Hmm.
Sometimes that works.
Oh, really?
It's just, to me, it's an extreme example of the way a lot of life is. If you can keep your attitude positive and stay focused with, a feeling of a good outcome,
Right.
it's just very beneficial as compared to dreading it. Because just like I said, sometimes you just get the crap beat out of you and you don't enjoy getting on one.
Yep.
And if you have that in your mind before you do it, it's just more likely that that's going to happen.
Okay. Gotcha. Right. Sort of how you avoid steering into a ditch. Well, first of all, don't look at the ditch so much, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. If you keep looking at the ditch, eventually you'll probably just sort of drift towards it.
Yep.
Wow. Man, that's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. It's growing up, I grew up on the East Coast, so we just didn't have the exposure to these sports that are a combination of nature and human athleticism, right? I mean, it was basketball and baseball and all good sports, of course, but I mean, there's something really elemental about the rodeo events because you're doing something athletic, but with the forces of nature, so to speak, right?
Right.
It's so different than just running up and down a court or what have you. Not, nothing against those things. So,
It's an unknown for sure.
yeah.
I mean, just in simply the rough stock events where you've got one man and one animal, just the two minds at play there,
Mm-hmm.
and different things that can happen because
Yeah.
of that add a lot of variables. You get into, like, say, team roping where you've got two men, two horses, and a steer, and all those things have to work together
Uh-huh.
in order for them, to try to get the lowest time and win some money. So
Right.
there's a lot of opportunity for things to not go the way you hope.
Right. Two men, two animal, two horses. Yeah.
Have five beings in that situation. Somebody
Sure.
can easily step out of line.
Yep. What it kind of reminds me of is who were we talking to? Fabian, yeah, about a couple months ago. He was telling us about
Yeah.
surfing,
Oh yeah.
right? Where it's like, yeah, you can have a lot of skills, but you really also have to catch the good wave, right? You want to have a really capital ride, you know, Mother Nature gets a lot of votes in that situation. You're there, you're waiting for that great wave.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could be waiting all day, you could be catching wave after wave. It's that luck of the draw is an element. Yeah. Man, I have to say, like, I watch those bull riders. I got to admit, doesn't strike my interest. What I thought looked like the coolest job was those pickup riders.
Yeah.
Going and picking up guys off the Broncos. I was like, that is the coolest job ever.
Sure.
Oh, have you done any of that?
I have a little bit, I've not done it enough to really say I'm proficient at it.
Okay,
Um,
you got to have a really savvy horse underneath you to be running up
yeah.
on angry Broncs.
Well, exactly, but it's not just a savvy horse, it's a string of savvy horses.
Oh, okay.
Because if you watch those pickup men closely, like maybe every 5 Broncs, they'll switch their pickup horse.
Okay.
Depending on what kind of stamina their horses have, just because they need to be riding something that's more fresh. Because each time you've got a fresh bucking horse,
Sure.
that hasn't been running around that arena yet. So after your pickup horses have to do enough work, he has to have one standing there tied, ready to go, where he just drags one out of the arena, the next one back in, jumps on, and the
Right.
rodeo goes on.
Rodeo goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Now that honestly to me looked like the coolest job. So,
Yeah.
but
It is definitely a cool job.
Yeah.
I have some friends that have done it, and done it in the pros, and yeah,
Mm.
it takes a lot of resources to be able to really do it right.
Mhm.
Or an immense amount of talent. Some people have a little bit of both and make it work, but yeah, definitely takes a lot to do it.
Where does amateur rodeo end and professional rodeo begin? Is it the amount of time and money? Do you have sponsors? Is it the amount of time you have available to train? There must be a talent element. I mean, I don't even know how that world works. I mean, how do you make the jump from amateur to actually I make a living riding rodeo?
Well, so the basis of it is going to be the association that you're part of.
Uh-huh.
Because there are amateur associations, like in Wyoming, the WRA, Wyoming Rodeo Association. I don't know what they're doing currently, but year to year, they typically have a few summer rodeos in our area.
Yep.
Then a step up from that would be like to go from the state level, which is amateur, to professional, like the PRCA, Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. That's probably what most people are trying to get to, depending on their event. They do have all the events. But then there's definitely different levels of income in that. The top 15 guys in each event every year are going to the National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas, where there's 10 rounds with usually around $25,000 available for first place. I think it is now. So then the way they're judged for their overall performance for the year is how much they've won in the regular season in combination with those higher money rounds at the NFR. Like that's how your world champion is decided.
Oh,
yeah. So just the top 15 are going to that. So you might look at the numbers on prize money and say, well, the top 25 are officially professional because they all made enough to make a living this year. But, maybe it's only the top 5 that really, had what you would consider a profitable season based on their expenses and the amount of money they've won. The thing that comes into play there is what kind of endorsements you might have at that level.
Okay.
There's very possibly people that are at that very upper level that are getting more money in endorsements than they are in prize money. That's one thing that's more unique about rodeo is there are no contracts and nobody gets told what they're going to make before the season starts. It's more of like a working man's sporting event where you're paid for your individual performance every time or not.
Right. You can try really hard and have
Yeah.
nothing to show for it.
That's absolutely true. And that happens to a lot of people because it is something that many people are passionate about. It's something difficult. It's a goal that feels great to achieve, and there's a certain amount of people with that drive that are trying to do it that aren't. you look at the top 50 in the world every year, and there's people doing exactly that or trying to that aren't really making money based on the expenses of traveling to 100 rodeos a year or around the U.S.
200 events a year.
Well, usually, I
That
think it's
would be
around 100 that they
okay.
allow for the NFR qualifications, maybe 85,
So
something
that's
like
twice a week. Yeah.
that. Yeah, and in the summertime, you might hit twice a day. Like over the 4th of July when things are really
Oh,
busy, like you might get on in the afternoon performance in Red Lodge and then drive as fast as you can over to Livingston to get on in the evening performance.
That sounds exhausting.
yeah.
I got to. Oh my God.
And so I don't want to leave
Yeah.
out like the PBR,
Yeah.
they're specific to bull riding, but
Okay.
they've really brought a new level. They've just isolated probably what is one of the most entertaining events in rodeo
Mhm.
because rodeos like NASCAR, people go to see the wrecks too. And the bull riding is what has most of it. So they've isolated the excitement of that event to make a production with just bull riding. And those guys, are making definitely the most money. The top guys in the PBR are out competing, at least from an individual event perspective on total money won. They're getting more money,
Mm-hmm.
for just that single event, and it's because of what the fans want to see.
Mm-hmm.
You can put the butts in the seats to watch that stuff happen, and that consistently leaves more money available for the people competing in that. So
Right.
PBR, I'll put up there with, PRCA or maybe even above it for that one event as far as, now that we crossed over from our amateur to our professional associations. And, everybody's probably got a little different opinion. Like, well, I'm from Texas and I'm a member of this association competing with world champions. And okay, sure, maybe that's professional.
Yep.
Yeah. But as far as national mainstream,
Mm.
my knowledge, that's what I got.
Right. Right. Everyone's happy to see the 4-H kids get around and race around some barrels, but they paid their ticket price
That's right.
to watch some bulls.
Right. You're gonna come back every year to watch 4-H kids run barrels.
Mhm.
Some people might, most are not going to. You gotta have that excitement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so much like unpredictability because it's like, it's like the alphas and the wild, bulls, kind of like the closest we kind of get these days.
Yeah.
So like just kind of like seeing a person how they can handle an alpha male species thing,
Right.
just like, and they try to encourage it to buck the guy off, they try
Yeah.
to make it as comfortable as possible. Yeah, there's a bit of thrill in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's why I was talking about heavyweight fighting with a friend of mine one time, and he's like, heavyweight fights, man, they suck so often. MMA, boxing not as bad, but in MMA, sometimes the heavyweight fights, you're just watching these two big guys just sort of fall all over each other. And
Mhm.
he's like, why are these events A, so popular generally, but B, why is the heavyweight stuff like often towards the end, like that bull riding? Like this is like the capital event. Like the their stamina sucks, their technique sucks, and I said to him, like, look, man, human beings love watching big men fight because there's just this elemental drama to it where, like, yeah, the two little 120-pound guys might have an amazing technical fight. It really might be spectacular on the level of athleticism. But when it comes to that heavyweight fight,
Yeah.
again, you're just like, okay,
Yeah.
I know who's going to be the leader of the tribe by the end of this, I exaggerate slightly, but I think there is an element of truth to why the heavyweight stuff attracts so much attention.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to, yeah, they're a good guy to have on your side. So interesting.
Kind of like the big family member, like the related family member that everyone talks about. Like, oh yeah, my cousin is just so big. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
my uncle is massive.
Right.
It's like those are the kind of people I want to hear about.
Right.
I've been around people from a family where many of the family members were that way, and they talked about all of them. Like it's
Really?
just, it's something that having a giant, is something people are into. It's like with horses.
Mm.
A lot of people are into draft horses, and if you are at a horse sale and you have a horse over 16 hands, for some reason, more people want it. And it's worth more money.
Just bigger
Because
really
it's big.
is better.
I ride a big giant horse.
I guess
Man. Is that why pickups got so big in over 2 decades? have you ever seen like an F-150 from 1990? It's like it's not it's not tiny, but it ain't a modern F-150 by any
Sure,
means.
yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people want to feel like king of the road, and yeah,
They they certainly act like it, I'll tell you that. Yeah. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times between Lander and Riverton, I'm just cruising along and just some guys blowing by, in some like, big F-250 or the Ram 3500s or whatever. It's like, "Oh my God, you're going to kill someone." You're in a 4-ton vehicle.
yeah,
You're in a little cruise missile right on the highway.
yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's amazing these days how much, just of their resources people will put into driving a big truck and a big diesel truck that they maybe don't even tow with.
Uh-huh.
Coming from a ranch background, it's a little bit more utility to me, I
Mm,
guess, like a diesel pickup's because you pull a trailer,
sure.
not because you want
And
to
you need that
burn
power.
all
You
four
need that torque.
tires,
Right. Right.
at the same time or something.
Come on, man, you got to roll that coal.
Yeah. It's cool. I mean, I love diesels too. I get it.
Yeah.
I just can't put that kind of investment into
Mm.
just transportation.
Right, right, right.
You've seen the Tacoma. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it makes a lot of practical sense, but I'm here to tell you, I went on a date in my little Honda Civic once,
Uh-oh.
and I went on one date in my Honda Civic.
That's a good point.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point.
Right. Now that yeah, shout out to Honda. Love your vehicles. We're going for a different vehicle next time.
We're impressing the ladies with that.
Oh yeah, and I parallel parked like a champ too. Man, I just pulled it in like no one's problem, but it's still.
What's the economy, the efficiency, the resale value? How could she not see it?
I was about to say no. You can try to put that lipstick on a pig, but you can't sell someone on the sex appeal of the little Civic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tough deal.
I saw a meme once, and it was like a dad had this really nice jacked up Jeep, and it says, "Because your daughter will never remember the time you got 48 miles to the gallon in your Prius." Your kids aren't excited about that.
No, 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 and it shouldn't be. So, but yeah, Brian, I wanted to, we've been talking about ranching, but one of the first questions I had for you, and um, it seems to me that we've touched a couple times on how some of that agricultural, some of that ranch lifestyle is slipping away. I mentioned an article to you a little while back about how I think like 4 companies control 70-80% of the beef business in the United States. Um, yeah, it's wild. Do you know if that's affected Wyoming very much, as much as other parts of the state? Do you know why there's been so little resistance to the monopolization of our food supply on a certain level? Like, what have you seen in your own lifetime?
Yeah, I mean, the way things are now, I think that's, as far as I know anyways, correct. The last that I heard on it, there was 4 companies that were responsible for processing beef, Packers, what they are. And, my understanding, I'm not an expert on it, but is that there's essentially a huge markup between the producer and the consumer, and that happens at the Packers. So,
Mm,
like you said, these people that have it kind of bottleneck down right there, they add on their upcharge
hmm
um, in the processing process, and then that's passed along to the consumers. So essentially, it's unfortunate for most people or in most situations where you've got a rancher who's fighting very thin profit margins to make it in his business.
mm,
So he's not getting any of that money. And then you've got the consumer who's trying to buy beef. They're paying an exorbitant cost for it.
sure.
And it's just, taking money out of their budget that they could put to something else. And then, like you said, you've got the Packers in the middle that are the ones that are
That's where the markup
making money.
happens.
Yeah.
Their value add is you're taking something that's on the hoof,
Right.
and then you're putting it something that can be sold at a grocery store. Is that
Right.
the packaging process?
To, my understanding, which I'm going to claim right now is simplistic of it.
Mm.
Yeah, that's where a lot of that occurs, and it's not beneficial to anyone but the corporations that
Sure.
are adding the markup. So, like there's people that are already working around it. All it takes is a rancher that's
Pull your mic closer there.
sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Yeah, all it takes is a rancher that's willing to, maybe start processing his own beef and then sell it at a little bit cheaper price, and he's going to get a lot more business, and the money goes in his pocket instead of in the Packer Corporation's pocket.
Hmm.
It's just that not a lot of people are set up to do that. Most ranches don't have processing facilities in place, so
Yep.
um, creates difficulty. I did a little bit of it myself, just with some roping cattle that I had that got too big to rope anymore. So we fed them and sold the beef, advertised it ourselves. And I took the cattle to the little local processing facility, and the buyers came and picked up their beef there. And I was able to sell it to them for cheaper than they could buy it at the store. And I was able to make more off of it than I would have if I had just taken them to the sale barn. So, sometimes that's an option to people, but when you look at the volume of cattle that are processed, it just seems like it overall, there's not a fix to solve all of it right now based on what's happening with the markup at these packing facilities. And, I want to be clear that I'm just giving you my limited knowledge on
Sure.
it. There are people that make their living in the cattle industry that, probably could tell you where I'm wrong or where my
Mm.
information is a little dated, that kind of stuff. It's what it
But they're
boils
looking
down
at
to.
they're looking at futures, and they're looking at shares in corporations. They're looking at drought levels. I mean, they're having this huge global view of this industry.
Yeah, and then
Okay.
those things are all factors that affect it for
Hmm.
sure. It just seems like just like you alluded to at the start of this subject is, it's like there's an issue in the process that we need to address
Mm.
um, that's as far as I'm aware, it hasn't been handled yet, and it's costing the American consumer money, and it's creating a lot of difficulty for the American rancher.
Uh-huh. Right, because the American rancher has tiny margins on a
Right,
product that eventually is quite profitable.
right,
So they're just sort of on the wrong end of the process.
right. Yeah, that's exactly the rub of it is, the thin profit margins in ag.
Hmm.
You don't typically have a high return on investment. Those are smaller numbers, and you have to manage things closer, and be careful with your expenses. And so if some of the money that's going into the packers' pockets in this scenario could be put back towards the rancher, it would definitely improve things for ranches in America.
Sure.
I don't know the statistics, but we've been fortunate in recent years that the cattle market's been strong, and the prices have stayed up as far as what the rancher's getting back. But, I've heard stuff as dismal as suicide rates going up among ranchers because of
Whoa.
some of the difficulty they're facing. Yeah, when someone's dedicated their lives to the pursuit of generating a product in that manner, and that culture is important to them, and it's just not a feasible business anymore in some instances because of the way things are. It's, it leaves some people hopeless. And I, I'm not an expert on that either, but I know that's, some stuff I've heard about it as dismal as that happening.
Right. But if you've never done anything else, you don't really know anything else, and you do love it,
Yeah,
right? All of a sudden that's taken away from you. You may really feel as if your life has been taken away from you.
right.
So why not take the rest of your life away from yourself?
Yeah, in some
That's crazy.
instances maybe, and yeah, it's just I'm sure those people, like in the scenario we're laying out, it's just not right that they're willing to work hard and, put forth the effort to generate a good life for themselves, but maybe the situation just, and each person I'm sure is different, but
Mm.
just unfortunate that some people they're with the circumstances in the market,
Mm.
there's not a way for them to make it.
Hmm.
or maybe a person who's watched the family ranch diminish, maybe generations before built it up and worked it in different circumstances, and now they have to look at losing their family's asset because of the way the market is.
Right. Yeah. Maybe they feel like they've betrayed their heritage, right?
Right,
Six
exactly.
generations passed this ranch to me, and now I'm the one who has to sell it.
Yeah, I
Oh
think
my God.
unfortunately that scenario has played out for a few people.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's terrible. Yeah. That's just so that's so hard. Yeah, it's so I read an article that said much of the Midwest, and this is why I was curious if Wyoming has seen the same thing, but much of the Midwest and this was happening in the 60s, 70s, 80s, right? The that the prices offered for land by large corporations was very generous, and so a lot of those small holding farmers said, "Yeah, I can send my kids to college, I can retire, I can have a easier and better life." Compounded with kids were looking at what they could make on the ranch versus what they could make in some sort of professional calling and saying, I don't want to go back to ranching. And so 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was this sort of absorption of the American family farm or the American family ranch into agribusiness,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so now we have this dynamic in which it's it's almost intractable, right? If you want to sell your beef, if there's only four companies that will buy your beef to process it, yeah, of course they're going to set their prices and they're going to set their prices as they see fit. And if you're like, this is unacceptable, I'm going to stop doing this, like, yeah, sure. Then there's another corporation or maybe just a subsidiary corporation that's happy to buy your land, right? There's not enough competition in the market for the producers of the actual beef to be competitive. I saw the same thing in dairy farming when I was back in Vermont because that was the only I'm going to say farming industry that survives in Vermont,
Mm-hmm.
is dairy farming.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing. A lot of guys said, "Yep, I'm dependent on either government subsidy if I'm organic, or if I'm not an organic farmer and I'm just selling to a big corporation, I really am at the mercy of what the market prices are,
Mm-hmm.
but those market prices are in some way set by by the very people buying
Mm-hmm.
my product. And so they are at the mercy of forces again beyond their control. It was rough. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in some ways the organic guys were, man, they were kind of playing it smart because they were tied into government subsidies, which of course had some influence by lobbyists. And so those pro organic lobbyists could be this other market force. Again, I'm not sure I would support that either
Mm-hmm.
as a general scenario, but it was at least a bit of a balancing force against just what Hood Milk wanted to pay you for your cows production. It was pretty wild, but I was working for this. So I was working for this organic dairy farmer, and he said, "Oh yeah, like I pasture raise, I'm organic. I have a respect for my cows' natural lifespan." He
Mm-hmm.
said, "My dairy cows, a full healthy lifespan for them is usually like 12 years."
Mm-hmm.
He said, "In California, there are farms with 30,000 milkers. They're dead in 6 years,
Yeah.
right? They're milked 3 times a day. They
Yeah.
never see sunshine. They
Yeah.
never see a field. They're just production units,
Yeah.
right?"
Maximizing profit.
Yeah, yeah. And some guy has said, you know what? 30,000 production units that wear out in 6 years is in fact more profitable than if we have to feed them and then they have limited production in the second half of their lifetime. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Thirty
just
thousand
heartless.
cows
Yeah, heartless to
on
do
a
it that way.
farm, right? I mean, that's not even a farm anymore.
Yeah. Well, and some of those maybe they've just stood on concrete inside of a barn their
Yeah.
entire life for
Mm-hmm.
feeding and milking.
Yep. 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 Yeah. No, it was I mean, I really valued the experience I was able to have as one of these last old French Canadian farmers from northern Vermont,
Mhm.
had his, 60, 70 cows, on this acreage up in Vermont.
Did you
And
milk by hand?
no, no, he did have a machine for that. Yeah. But yeah, he did. I mean, obviously, if there was a troubled cow, he would do some of the milking by hand. If there was one with sour bags or whatever.
Yeah.
But no, he did do most of it by machine. But yeah, I mean, it was sort of this last step into the time machine, right? Where you could be out on a tractor in a field with views of the mountains, trees and fields all around you with 60 happy cows, right? It was like
Yeah.
this experience is unavailable to most of America. So yeah, I was very lucky.
Well, yeah, and probably becoming just less feasible from a business standpoint,
Mm,
with expenses and a smaller number of cows and just more difficult to accomplish all the time. Like,
mm,
I think ultimately, a lot of the concern for the discussion we're having is where's the future headed as far as supplying the country with food?
mhm.
Agriculture being a diminishing thing, we all have to eat. Like, we are getting definitely more efficient by having less people involved. Each person involved is producing a greater amount, but
Mhm.
like there's going to be, it just seems to me, I guess, like there's going to have to be some kind of a tipping point where we're suddenly like, okay, well, two more continents got to survive on bugs because we're not generating enough food or something.
Well, the system's more fragile. It might be more efficient, right? But
Yeah.
if we limit the breeds that we use, if we limit the supply, where the supply of feed is coming from, if we limit the type of crops to which we are, by which we are feeding our beef, feeding our milk, right? It is more efficient,
Mm-hmm.
but it is more susceptible to one single parasite, one single bad weather event.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, yeah, I only feed corn. If corn has a problem in the United States,
Yeah, if there's a shortage.
we're up a creek.
Right. Yeah, it just seems like it becomes more of a delicate balance, the less people you have in there, the less family farms, and I don't know. It's definitely a
Maybe the
different
less drama you have. Maybe that was the whole.
maybe.
People didn't want to deal with cranky old farmers anymore.
But it's the corporate influence today, I think is just very different than if you look at like 30 years ago.
Really?
Just the amount of ranches that are owned by corporations is what I mean by corporate influence, and not just owned, but the way they're traded. I mean, bought and sold like every 5 years on some places,
Mm-hmm.
and multi-million-dollar deals. It's just it's it's very different than when you had a family who lived generationally on a ranch,
Mm.
and that same family kept that place going for decades on decades. And now, you might have that same piece of property right here in Wyoming with 4,000 mother cows, and every 5 years it has a new owner.
Just because some actuary in some office has decided, no, we need to unload this asset, go concentrate
Yeah.
in a
We made
different
our money
sector.
doing this, or we're going to make our money on this sale or whatever,
Mm.
and we've got someone interested. And yeah, just, and I think there's some truth to it, but another aspect I've heard of the Yellowstone TV show,
Mm.
pop culture affecting real life is ranches have become something of investment in people's portfolio. They'll
Yeah.
buy a place on the prospect of reselling it a few years later for a greater profit than they would have by investing that same money in a certain stock,
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which is just very different
Right.
than 20 years ago or
Right.
even
Coeur d'Alene's really growing. Buy something near Coeur d'Alene. It's going through a boom.
yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Hmm.
I don't know. I definitely don't have all the information on it or
Yeah.
all the answers. It's just, it seems like a very strong trend and
Uh-huh.
a big change in the way things are going overall to me.
Right. Where do you hope to be yourself? Like if you could plot out the next 10 years for your own involvement in all of these things, I mean, would you like to be, not, would you like to be specializing in horse training and not really having to worry about hay production? Or you're like, no, I kind of want to wind that down, go more towards another aspect. I mean, do you feel your own need to start specializing yourself in your own involvement in ranching?
I definitely look at things like I mentioned, changing the way I put up my hay.
Uh-huh.
So like typically what I've been doing is putting up big round bales. They're
Yep.
about 1,200 pounds a piece, and they're simple to put up. They're really simple to feed. So it's been a good way to put up my hay with, wintering horses through the winter on the ranch there. But like this year, where I may not have much through the winter, it makes me look at like getting a small baler where I would have to have a more equipment and labor intensive haying process, but my hay is essentially worth twice as much at the end of it because it's in little bales that everybody can handle by hand instead of big bales that someone has to have a tractor to move around. So
So anyone can come and get it, which means there's
that's right.
more buyers, which means there's more demand,
Yeah.
which means you command a higher price.
Yep. It exactly. That's what it boils down to. Like some of that that I've looked at includes bundling them to where you can basically take a bunch of little bales and make a big bale. Then like you load that on a truck, get it to a facility, and they can unload it, and then people can take it by hand.
Okay.
So yeah, same kind of thing. It's basically just how you set it up for people to move it to their
Right.
animal.
Right.
It's a big
Multi-pack.
Yeah, because like right now, I think I can't say right now because I haven't looked at the most recent hay report, but I think the most recent one I looked at for Wyoming was the end of August, maybe first part of September, and the same hay in small bales was worth about I think $80 a ton more
Mhm.
than if that same hay was put up in big bales where you have to have a tractor to
Okay.
handle it.
Okay. And the loss of value to the individual is a big round bale. I need special equipment to go get it, to transport it, and to feed it out.
Yeah,
Whereas, go ahead.
what you would want to do like well just my process for example with my round bales all I do is I cut it, then when it's nearly dry I rake it and I bale it.
Mm-hmm.
Then once it's baled I just go load it on my trailer that I can move with my tractor, so I drive around out in my field with my tractor and my trailer, and then I can set the trailer down, load hay on it, back under the trailer, pick it up with my 3-point hitch and run around. So um, what I would have to add into that, like if I wanted to go to small bales with a bundler, would be in the baling process after it's raked, I would have to include a bundler. So that's going to slow the baling process there. And then would be able to load it essentially the same way. But another way of doing it would be once it's baled in single small bales, leave out the bundler and get a stack wagon where you can drive around in that stack wagon and generate a load of them, or you can put them in a stack. So, that adds another piece of equipment to do it that way. And just, I know people that have tried it and thought they were going to end up with more profit from doing it that way than they did. So looking at, $100,000 equipment investment, you just have to weigh that stuff out.
More breakage. Yeah.
More breakdowns, sure, definitely more money tied up in the equipment. Yeah, I mean that right there is just an example of some of the things you have to consider to just try to stay competitive every way you can, or I shouldn't really say competitive, try to stay profitable.
Stay viable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Man, well, I certainly hope you do stay viable because having guys like you in our community and just showing something to not only people who are around now but to their kids and grandkids is going to be certainly a valuable heritage for all of us. Man, we really enjoy having you on here. We hope you can come back soon. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me, guys. I've enjoyed it too.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to get you back to the GDM as soon as we can.
Right on.
Cool. Well, bye everybody.